The job was, as Severance had said, not neat and tidy like a holotape of a dissection. Twice Sidra had to stop long enough to let the racking heaves pass. Both times she recovered and went back to the task. She knew the theory of what needed to be done. She'd had a very thorough education. When she was finished, she pushed the entrails and the head outside the circle. She washed the hopper's blood from her hands and let her stomach have its way one more time. Then she switched on the flamer and spitted a hindquarter on the point of the knife. Ignoring the hissing of crackling fat, she roasted her kill. She stilled her mind and her body before she took the first bite by repeating the familiar words that preceded a harmonic meal. This time the food stayed down. It took an effort of will, and there were a few seconds when Sidra wasn't sure she was going to win the contest with her stomach, but in the end she did. Slowly and methodically she ate the entire hindquarter. Then she roasted the second hindquarter and carried it over to Severance. "Try to eat," she coaxed, letting him have a whiff of the meat. He didn't respond. When she tried to insert a bite between his lips, he spit it out. With a sigh, Sidra sat back on her heels and wondered what to do next. An hour later she happened to glance across the circle and saw that the remains of the hopper were gone. Another Renaissance meal was concluded, bones and all. Nothing went to waste on this planet. The day progressed with painful slowness. Twice Sidra dozed, snapping uneasily awake each time. Perhaps it would be better if she slept during the daylight. If she didn't, she was bound to drift off to sleep tonight. The circle seemed so safe. The third time her eyes closed, Sidra allowed herself to drift into sleep. A faint cracking sound woke her some time later. She opened her eyes slowly and realized that dusk was settling on the jungle. She and Severance had spent another whole day here. The thought of her companion made her glance automatically in his direction. He was still sleeping soundly, curled around the stone. She heard the cracking noise again and roused herself fully, reaching for the pulsar in her lap. She climbed to her feet and peered around the circle. Nothing stirred near the edge as far as she could see. When the sound came a third time, she suddenly realized where it was coming from and whirled around toward Severance. She saw the rock he was holding shiver in his grasp. Sweet harmony. Sidra edged closer, trying to see what was happening. Severance was still huddled around his possession, but the stone seemed to be quivering in his arms. Even as she watched, a distinct crack appeared in the black surface. Unaware of what she was doing, Sidra brought up the nose of the pulsar and stepped forward. This time she would take the stone away from Severance by force. Surely, after all these hours of fever, he was no longer strong enough to stop her. There was a sharp splintering sound from the rock just as Sidra reached for it. Severance groaned and hugged it closer. She succeeded in pushing one of his hands out of the way and had just gotten a grip on the sphere when it cracked completely open. She heard the savage hissing before she saw the damp reptilian head emerge from the broken stone. Frantically, Sidra struggled to pull the rock away from Severance before whatever was inside escaped. Fragments of the shell came free in her hand. The head whipped out, snapping at her hand with a mouthful of tiny sharp teeth. Sidra yelped and yanked her fingers out of the way. The creature turned immediately towards Severance's midsection, its blue, leathery body uncurling from the remains on the shell. With a sudden shock of logic, Sidra realized what was going to happen. Severance was intended as the hatchling's first meal. She didn't dare fire the pulsar at this range. She would surely kill Severance as well as whatever was trying to eat him. Furiously, she banged the nose of her weapon against the creature's snout. The blow managed to get its attention away from Severance. The creature hissed again and struck at the offending pulsar. Its teeth closed around the metal and then released it as it apparently realized that the pulsar couldn't be eaten. Frantically, Sidra slammed the weapon against the leathery blue head once more. Again she got the creature to snap at the muzzle of the pulsar. This time she jerked upward and out. With its mouth still locked around the metal mouth of the pulsar, the blue reptile was carried with it. The creature released its hold in midair and fell to the ground in a hissing coil. It struck at Sidra as if realizing that she was the source of the problem. Sidra raised the pulsar and fired with the same unthinking sureness she had used to bring down the hopper. The reptile jerked twice. It writhed horribly on the ground, attempting even in its death throes to get back to its intended meal. Sidra fired again, and at last it went still. Behind Sidra, Severance groaned sharply, still not waking. He moved restlessly and spoke in a slurred, hot tone. "Sidra. Sidra." She ignored him, her attention still on the dead stone creature. She wanted it out of the circle. It was wrong here. Dead or alive, it had no business in this place. She kicked at the body with the toe of her boot. It flipped over, revealing 4 appendages on the iridescent light blue belly. The front pair terminated in projections that looked too much like human fingers for Sidra's peace of mind. She kicked at the dead body again, intent on getting it out of the circle. The sense of wrongness was almost overpowering now. She knew for certain that she didn't want to touch it with her hands. 3 more kicks brought the stone creature's body to the edge of the circle. Sidra swung the toe of her boot one more time and pitched the remains into the thick greenery on the other side of the magic perimeter. There was a stir of activity almost at once. She got a glimpse of a furred tail as something pounced and then heard the crunch of jaws on a blue, leathery body. Renaissance would take care of the problem. Sidra hurried back to Severance. He was more restless than ever. The front of his shirt was ripped where the creature had taken a bite out of it, but there were no marks on his skin. Sidra breathed a sigh of relief and knelt beside him. His stirred under her hand, so hot. "It's so reeling hot. I can't stand it." He tore at his shirt with his hands. "Stop it, Severance." Firmly she pulled his fingers free of the shirt. "I'll cool you down. I promise." She reached for the bag and poured water over his head, throat, and chest, dampening the shirt. He shivered and quieted. Lapsing back into an unintelligible mumble, he curled up again and appeared to be about to go back to sleep. Sidra wetted him again and waited. The delirious mumbling halted finally, and Sidra decided that he was asleep. She sat back and tried to think. The first thing that came to mind was the memory of the 4 black stones that were piled in the safehold. She had to destroy them. There was no telling when Severance might decide to make another trip inside and carry one out. Furthermore, there was no telling when one of those awful eggs might hatch of its own accord. The thought of 4 of the dark blue reptiles wandering out of the safehold seeking food was more than Sidra wanted to contemplate. Wearily she got to her feet again and went to stand at the entrance of the safehold. From the walls came a faint glow, illuminating the interior now. At the far end of the room, the 4 stones rested in shadow. Sidra tried to decide what she would do if she went into the room and accidentally triggered the illusions. She would need the screamer. She went back to Severance and removed it from his loop. Then she tightened her grip around the pulsar and stepped inside the chamber. Nothing happened, just as nothing had happened the first time she had entered. Staying close to the wall in case she needed to use its surface as a point of reference, she walked slowly around the room. She reached the small group of eggs at the back without having touched off either the ghost history or the horrific illusions. Facing the eggs, Sidra took aim and systematically shot each. At first nothing happened. The tough stone casing around the creatures seemed to absorb the energy of the pulsar. She stepped closer and fired again. This time one of the shells cracked. When it fell apart, Sidra could see that the reptile inside was dead. She used the pulsar to break open the rest of the shells so that she could assure herself that all the creatures were destroyed. Part of her wanted to clear the remains out of the safehold, but she didn't feel up to the task. She would have to content herself with knowing that the eggs were no longer a menace. Sidra turned back toward the entrance, one palm still flattened on the curving wall, and trotted quickly toward the sunshine, expecting a wave of illusions to block her path. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until she stepped outside without incident. It occurred to her that perhaps the illusions were somehow tied to the eggs. Perhaps a protective device. With the eggs destroyed, the trap might not work any longer. As for the ghost's history projection, Perhaps it was simply so old that it had faded into oblivion after one last showing. There was no point speculating on either possibility. She had her hands full, tending Severance. For the next 2 hours she kept up the cooling baths. He slipped in and out of a troubled sleep, muttering occasionally and once in a while knocking her hands away in restless irritation. At the end of the 2 hours of bathing his fevered body, Sidra thought she detected some improvement. He seemed to be cooling down at last. She peeled off the bandage and examined the wounds. They were red and swollen, but not alarmingly so. She sprayed more antiseptic on them and then covered them again with the plastic adhesive. Severance opened his eyes just as she was finishing the task. His gaze was clearer than it had been for hours. "Did I hurt you?" Sidra smiled, relieved to see something besides fever in his eyes. He still looked dazed and uncomprehending, but she could see him struggling to identify her. "How could you hurt me? You're from Clementia." Sidra shook her head at his logic and touched his temple. "You're on the mend, Severance. Your fever is breaking. I didn't take care of you. I almost got you killed." "No, Severance. You saved my life. More than once." He moved his head in restless denial. "Just like Judd. Almost got you killed, just like Judd." "Hush," she soothed. "You didn't kill your brother. Should never have let him go to QED alone. He was too soft. Too gentle." Followed a distress signal right into the ground. Never realized he'd been tricked. Sidra frowned. "Be easy, Severance. Had to kill Racer. Racer set up the signal. Racer tried to take you from me. He would have hurt you, Sidra. He wanted to hurt me." "I know," she whispered, wondering about what he had said earlier. "Racer drew your brother to his death with a fake distress signal?" "Racer murdered Judd. Said he hadn't meant to, but he did. And I never even knew until, he broke off, clearly groping for some sense of time." "It's all right, Severance. It's all over. Everything's over. Racer is dead. All my fault," he muttered again. "I put you in danger. Just like I put Judd in danger. Severance, listen to me. It is not your fault. You've taken care of everything. Racer is dead." But he wasn't listening. The gray eyes looked up at her with unnatural intensity. "I let Judd get killed, and I almost let you get killed. You're like him. I'm supposed to protect you. You and he both belong in Clementia." His voice faded as his eyes began to close. "You're like him." Sidra stared down at his hard face as he drifted back into sleep. "No, Severance. You're wrong. I'm not like Judd." Her eyes fell on the pulsar that lay close at hand on the ground. "I'm not at all like Judd." She bathed him once more, but now she was certain that he had turned the corner. The fever was definitely subsiding. A damp, healing sweat filmed his skin. Sidra concentrated on getting Severance to drink plenty of water. Toward nightfall she stationed herself near the edge of the circle, slipped into the trance that made the pulsar a part of her, and waited for another unwary hopper. Now she was amazed that anything as stupid as a hopper survived on Renaissance. The food chain was a complex thing. Right now she was sitting at the top of that chain, a reasonably well-adapted predator. For someone who had never before eaten meat, doing so was a major change. But, then, everything else in her life was changing, so her eating habits might as well also. A flicker of ears caught her attention. The hopper made a dash through a relatively open area of vegetation, and Sidra killed it in mid-leap. This time she didn't throw up when she cleaned the carcass. Sidra wasn't sure if that was an improvement or not. It seemed to her that part of her should still be fastidious enough to get sick at the thought of killing and butchering food. On the other hand, a steady stomach was proving much more convenient than an unsteady one. Severance awoke long enough to eat some of the roasted meat and drink more water. Sidra stopped worrying about her weakening vegetarian ethics. She was too busy being grateful that she had managed to get her patient to eat. After dinner she settled herself against the wall of the safehold and cradled Severance's head in her lap. Fingers wrapped around the grip of the pulsar, she leaned back against the wall and wondered if she would be able to stay awake all night. Probably not. She was exhausted. She could only hope that the ring of safety would protect both herself and Severance during the times she was unable to keep her eyes open. She slept off and on during the long night. Every time she awoke she could tell by the chronometer on Severance's loop that she had only been napping for 15 or 20 minutes. The usual screams and cries of the jungle went on all around the edge of the circle, but nothing encroached. Severance slept soundly, pillowed in her lap. Sidra could tell that the fever had left his body. With any luck he would be feeling much better in the morning. She still wasn't sure how long he would need to recover enough to risk the trip back to the campsite, but at least he was on the mend. If need be, they could spend another couple of days here in the circle. Once or twice Sidra awakened during the night to discover Severance burrowing closer to her, his face turned into her midsection as if he sought comfort from her warmth. She wrinkled her nose as she caught her own unbathed scent. In the morning she would clean herself at the stream. Never in her life had she gone so long without a bath. She fantasized for quite a while about having unlimited access to one of Clementia's elegant bathing rooms. The night passed without incident. When dawn filtered once more through the green canopy, Sidra yawned and gently eased Severance's head out of her lap. She left him sleeping while she undressed and knelt beside the sparkling stream. The water looked clear and pure, and she could no longer resist it. The liquid felt wonderfully cool and bracing in the morning air. She even undid her frazzled braids and washed her hair in the bubbling stream. She arranged it loosely around her shoulders to dry in the sun. By the time she was finished, Sidra decided that she felt like a new woman. She put her trousers back on but decided to rinse out her shirt. Leaving it to dry on the green carpet, she picked up the pulsar and walked to the edge of the circle to look for breakfast. Carefully she put herself into the trance that enabled her to become a hunter. Severance yawned and stretched, distantly aware of an ache in his shoulder. He flexed it irritably and felt the pull of bandages. Slowly memory returned. He was stiff, and his head no longer felt nearly as comfortable as it had when he'd been sleeping in Sidra's lap. Sidra's lap, the thought opened his eyes. He saw the curving translucent wall rising above him, felt the green cushion under his back, and wondered how in a renegade's hell he'd been so stupid as to let himself get used for target practice by a lockmouth. Reluctantly he rolled onto his side, looking for Sidra. He saw her rise from the edge of the stream, her slender body nude from the waist up. Her sweetly curved BR*********** looked perfect in the primitive morning light. The dark brown fire of her hair gleamed damply in the sun. Severance stared at her in silence, absorbing the sight of her, and then he winced at the direction of his thoughts. He was definitely feeling better, Severance decided, was about to speak when he saw Sidra bend down, scoop up the pulsar, and walk to the edge of the circle. At first he thought she had seen something to alarm her, and then he saw her sink down into a cross-legged position. She went very still, her slender back elegantly straight. Before long, there was a flash of movement in the bushes. As calmly and coolly as a lifelong huntress she squeezed the trigger. A hopper flopped to the ground within easy reach. Severance stared at the scene with a sense of shock that quickly changed to admiration. He sat up as she reached out of the circle to catch hold of the hopper by its ears. Is this the same lady who can't look a Torla steak in the eye? Severance. She whirled around, the hopper in one fist, and gazed at him in delight. For an instant, relief and happiness lit her whole face, and then she remembered that she wasn't wearing her shirt. A tide of pink flowed into her cheeks and throat. She dropped the hopper and made a dash for the damp garment she had left beside the stream. How are you feeling? She asked as she turned away from him to put on the wet shirt. Like I've been hit with a freight sled. She turned around as she finished fastening the shirt and peered at him. You look much better. I've been very worried, Severance. You were quite feverish from the wound. He shrugged his injured shoulder, assessing the pain critically. I think I'm going to live. How much time have we lost? We've spent 2 nights here in the circle. She came forward slowly. Do you remember any of it? He smiled. Some. You have a very nice lap. He started to get to his feet. Something sharp on the ground dug into his leg. He reached down and picked up a small, jagged object. Where did this come from? Sidra glanced at the scrap of shell. Now that, she said, is a very interesting story. You can tell it to me while I clean the hopper. Her eyes brightened. Do you feel up to cleaning it? I can't say I like the job. He grimaced. How many have you cleaned? 2. Severance shook his head wonderingly. Incredible. You've become a real carnivore. She made a face. I prefer not to think about it. He held out his hand. I can handle the pulsar again too. Maybe not quite as well as you seem to be doing, but it would make me feel useful. She glanced down at the weapon in her fingers. I've grown used to having it around. Severance realized that her reluctance to give him the pulsar was real. Gently he took it from her and examined the charge window. How many shots did it take to get the first hopper? The charge is way down. Oh, she said easily, I've been shooting a lot of things besides hoppers. Her words sent a distinct jolt through him. A fleeting glimpse of a nightmare cropped up from out of nowhere. There had been something evil and dangerous in his fevered dreams, something that had demanded his help. The image flickered and died, leaving behind an unpleasant taste. I think you'd better tell me what I've missed, Severance said. Chapter 16 Eggs, Severance. Those stones were some creature's eggs. Really nasty little renegades too. The one you were clinging to tried to eat you alive the second it hatched. Don't you remember anything at all about going back into the safe hold to bring out one of the stones? Severance concentrated on the task of butchering the hopper. No, then he hesitated, his jaw tightening. There were some dreams, though. Dreams? Sidra waited, aware that he was struggling with himself. She couldn't decide if he was trying to remember or trying to forget. Severance paused with the knife in his hand and stared unseeingly into the jungle. I remember having to do something. It was important. No, it was imperative. Something's life depended on it. And if I obeyed, I would stop freezing. I was so damned cold. That's all I remember. Sidra wasn't sure she believed him, but she did believe that was all he wanted to remember. You insisted on going back into the safe hold. I tried to stop you with my moonlight and mirrors routine. I might as well have been trying to dance with you. His head came around quickly, eyes alarmed. Did I hurt you? Knocked me flat, she assured him cheerfully. Seeing the expression on his face, she relented. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. You weren't out to hurt me, you just wanted to be left alone. The interesting part about all this is that when you went inside the safe hold to get the egg, you didn't trigger the illusions. How do you know? Perhaps I was too far gone to know what I was seeing. I know because I went in after you, and I didn't see a thing. You went in after me? He sighed as if in resignation, but he didn't launch into a lecture. Go on. She told him about the hatching of the egg and her decision to destroy the rest of them. The illusions didn't stop me when I tried to leave the safe hold after finishing off those eggs either. I think they were tied to them somehow. A protective device. I wouldn't be surprised if the idea was that the illusions trapped the prey close to the eggs. Food for the hatchlings? And perhaps a source of warmth for them. No telling how long those eggs have been in there. It wasn't until you curled around one that it hatched. What kind of creature could it have been, Severance? From everything we've seen, nothing else on this planet except us has crossed the boundary of this circle or gone into the safe hold. Except the ghosts themselves, he pointed out. I refuse to believe that those blue things are related to the ghosts in any way. You're the well-educated member of the crew, Sidra. You should know by now that refusing to believe in something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Those egg creatures are something out of a nightmare, she insisted. The ghosts were a gentle, civilized people who at one time conquered this very ungentle, uncivilized planet. They might have become soft at the end, but they sure as hell weren't at the beginning. I'm not going to argue with you about it. I just know that those blue things aren't related to the ghosts. Maybe they were watchdogs for the ghosts, Severance suggested thoughtfully. Guardians for the safehold? I don't think so. There's something wrong about those eggs and the creatures inside them. They don't fit in here on Renaissance. At that comment, Severance laughed shortly. Anything that can kill its own food and eat it raw fits in just fine here on Renaissance. Sidra folded her arms across her chest, pacing restlessly around the circle. It wasn't just that they were vicious and ugly. Lots of things here seem to be vicious and ugly. But even the worst of them, that lockmouth for instance, seemed to belong in some way I can't explain. Those eggs don't. Or didn't. Remember when we first went into the safehold, you said there was a feeling of alienness? Yeah. You didn't agree, though. You were too wrapped up with ghost stories. It wasn't the ghosts who felt alien. But the presence of the eggs might have bothered your instincts on some level. My instincts are fairly basic, Sidra. Chiefly focused on staying alive, eating, sleeping, and, one or two other fundamental matters. They're not the elevated, intuitive instincts of a harmonic. I don't see why I would have sensed the eggs in some special manner. She stopped pacing at the edge of the circle. Well, whatever they were, they're gone now. He stood up, leaving the skinned hopper on the ground near the edge of the circle. Coming up behind Sidra, Severance said softly, "Thanks to you. I'm not sure I'm paying you enough. I've never had a crew member quite like you, Sidra Rainforest. Loyalty and resourcefulness above and beyond the call." She turned, aware of a deep feeling of pleasure. She dipped her head formally. "It is as nothing, Teague Severance. Do not concern yourself. All is serene." He grinned, a brief flash of teeth that disappeared quickly as his eyes grew serious. "Still a few remnants of harmonic ways left, HM? Amazing. How are you handling the transformation, Sidra?" Her flush of pleasure faded. She thought about killing hoppers and little blue monsters. Memories of trying to stay awake with a sick man lying in her lap and a pulsar in her hand flooded her mind. There has not been a great deal of choice in the matter. He looked at her oddly. "No, there hasn't, has there? I haven't given you much choice." Abruptly, he turned away to set up the flamer. Sensing his inner withdrawal, Sidra stood quietly, watching his efficient manners. "Your arm seems much better this morning." "Yes. Severance, while you were delirious you said I was like Judd. But I'm not, am I?" He studied the flame he had started before answering slowly. Judd had great courage. He would have done what had to be done. But it would have torn him apart. "It hasn't torn me apart." She made the observation almost to herself. "You shouldn't have had to face what you faced since you shipped out with me. You weren't raised to confront murderers and monsters. I should have followed my instincts that first night and packed you off to Clementia. You didn't have that choice, Teague Severance. I make my own decisions. Let's argue about it after we get back to try again." She wanted to argue now. Sidra lifted her head proudly, prepared to defend herself and her rights. But she stopped cold as her eye caught a flash of movement at the edge of the circle. "Severance." He was on his feet at once, the pulsar in his fist. "What is it?" "The hopper. The one you just finished cleaning. It's gone." He swore, striding toward the spot where the carcass had lain on the ground. "I left it inside the circle." Sidra's eyes widened. "I know." Something with a long orange tail just reached into the circle and grabbed it. "Severance, in all the time we've been here nothing has come inside that circle. Either there's something else besides us that's immune or..." He dug the toe of his boot into the invisible line of protection. A small worm slithered to the surface and disappeared again. Until now there hadn't even been any worms inside the protected area. Or the circle is shrinking. Why would it start shrinking now? How should I know? It might have been a lot bigger once than it is now. It might have been gradually shrinking all along, but at such a slow rate that you haven't noticed. Or perhaps it started fading when the mind call was activated one last time. It's probably all connected. Unhappily, she stared at the edge of the circle. I hope everything we've found isn't going to disappear. There's so much to learn here, Severance. So much to be explored. We can worry about that later. Right now we've got another problem. What problem? He absently massaged his shoulder. I was thinking of spending one more night here and leaving in the morning. But if this circle is shrinking, I don't want to risk it. The whole reading thing could disintegrate in the middle of the night, and we'd be left in what would definitely qualify as an awkward situation. We'll have to start back to the campsite today. Do you feel up to making the journey? Sidra asked anxiously. My shoulder's stiff, but I feel fairly normal. I would have thought that the fever would have left you feeling exhausted. I know. But maybe the fever wasn't caused by the wound, Severance said thoughtfully. Maybe it had something to do with what happened in the safehold. If I've been as sick as you've said, I shouldn't be feeling this good so soon. But my shoulder feels the way it should after 2 days of that antiseptic. And I'm not weak the way I should be after spending several hours in a delirium. You think the eggs caused the fever? I wonder. What if they were capable of sensing your weakness after the lockmouth clawed your shoulder? Perhaps they sensed the blood and somehow focused on you. Something drew you back into that safehold. And when you came out, you wouldn't let go of that stone. His mouth tightened. I think our luck here is running out. We'll be better off making a try for the campsite than sitting here waiting for the circle to collapse. This time around I'll make it a point to stay alert on the trip out. Let's get our stuff together. Sidra obeyed, collecting the water bag and the knife as Severance repacked the utility loop. She paused when she spotted the stone shard on the ground. I think I'll take this back to Disma. She'll find it interesting. She dropped it into her pocket. All set? Sidra nodded, glancing back at the safehold. I hope it lasts until someone gets here with a holotape set to record the history stored inside. Even if the circle doesn't hold much longer, it will take quite a while for that safehold to be reduced to rubble, even here on Renaissance. Let's go. Does it strike you, Severance, that you're always asking if I'm ready to go? You'll get used to it. The pulsar was gripped in his right fist as he started back into the jungle. The utility knife was in his left hand. Sidra smiled to herself and followed. 1 hour and 2 dead green slicers later, Severance called a halt. He tapped the face of the directional indicator and sighed. We've got a problem. Sidra battled at a small buzzing creature intent on landing on her cheek. You're thinking we didn't walk for much more than an hour that first night? I see that the thought has crossed your mind too. We might have been totally unaware of the time, she offered. It was dawn when we reached the safehold. I think we left the campsite just shortly before dawn. No more than an hour before. What does the directional gadget show? That we're within a few meters of the skimmer. Sidra looked around at the heavy vegetation surrounding them on all sides. I don't see a river. Neither do I. Perhaps we're just a few meters away. Tentatively Sidra shoved at a hanging vine. This stuff is so thick, we could be a short distance from the river and not be able to see it. We should be able to smell it. She remembered the unique scent of the muddy water. You've got a point. Okay, fearless and respected leader, what next? We'll give the beacon another 10 minutes. If it hasn't led us to anything familiar by then, we'll backtrack. Is that why you took a whack out of the tree with your knife every couple of meters? So we'd have a trail to follow back to the circle? He lifted one shoulder negligently. You can't be too careful on Renaissance. So I've noticed. How are you feeling? Fine. The shoulder's stiff, but it's not getting in my way. Want me to wear the utility loop for a while? I imagine it gets a little heavy. You've got so many interesting things packed inside. She stepped close, reaching for the closure of the Rant-Gone leather loop. I was going to ask you a couple of questions about what you carry around with you, Severance. As she moved, the edge of her skirt brushed against Severance's arm. Forget the loop. I said I'm fine. I'd feel naked without it. He was staring at the directional device as she stepped back. Do that again, Sidra. Do what? Come close. She saw the direction of his attention. Something wrong? Just brush up against my arm again. Uneasily she did as she was told. When she started to move back, Severance caught her wrist and held her close. What is it? She asked. Look at the signal, he muttered. It's going crazy. You mean, I'm causing it to go crazy? Sidra's mouth felt very dry. Or something you've got on you. I don't understand. These things are virtually fail-proof. Disma says mechanical stuff is always breaking down on Renaissance. Empty your pockets. Hurry. She reached inside her shirt, and the first thing her hand touched was the stone shard. Slowly, with a feeling of doom, she brought it out and held it toward the directional device. Sweet reading hell. Severance jerked the shard from her hand and waved it back and forth across the surface of the device. I'm sorry, Severance. Sidra stood in dismay, bearing the full weight of a heavy guilt. I didn't realize it would cause trouble. He tossed the shard as far as he could into the undergrowth. Neither did I, although I suppose we should have made an educated guess on the subject. I wonder what it was about that slice of eggshell that could screw up the signal on this thing. How does it read now? It says the skimmer is west of us and not very close. We've got a long walk ahead. He looked up and started to say something else. Sidra held up her palm. Don't say it. I'll say it. Let's get going. A reluctant smile edged Severance's mouth. You're learning. He started forward with Sidra close behind. They hadn't gone more than a few paces when Sidra saw the glint of black stone. Severance, there's the shard. But I thought you threw it much farther. He turned to glance back. I did. And I threw it in a different direction. That's not the shard. Cautiously, he used the knife to push aside the heavy mass of creeping vines. A black, curving surface glinted in the dappled light. Sweet harmony in hell. It looks like a giant version of one of the stones. Severance, we've got to get out of here. Sidra tugged at him frantically, but he shook off her hands. If it's another egg, it's a huge one. Anything that hatches from that thing isn't going to be stopped very easily. You saw how much of the pulsar charge it took to destroy the little eggs. If it's an egg, it's already cracked. What? She peered around his shoulder to see what he was looking at. The huge sphere was crumpled and jagged on one side, revealing a gaping hole. Inside there was only darkness. Sidra edged back, trying to pull Severance with her. Everything within her that had felt wrong about the eggs was reacting violently to this discovery. It's not made of the same material as the egg, although it's the same color. Severance touched the black surface. It's a metal of some kind. Like nothing I've ever seen. He dug out the quartz flash and shined it into the dark hole. He sucked in his breath. It's a ship, Sidra. Some kind of vehicle. It's got to be. She stared at the array of mechanisms revealed in the light of the flash. The shapes were oddly distorted to her eyes, unfamiliar and strange. Not a human ship. You can say that again. Severance stepped closer, clearly fascinated. Not a ghost ship either. At least nothing in here appears designed to fit one of the creatures we saw in that history lesson we got in the safehold. Their hands were similar to ours, and anything mechanical they built would have had similar gripping surfaces. The height of everything is wrong too. Some of it's too high and some of it's too low. Everything's made out of this same black metal. Severance, it looks too much like one of those eggs. The same color, the same shape, and it was that shard in my pocket that drew us here. I told you those blue things were alien to this planet. Let's get out of here. But he was already moving closer to the gaping black hole. It occurred to Sidra that any man with Severance's natural aptitude for keeping machines in working order was probably going to be overcome with a fascination for this alien gadget. Whatever was once in this thing is long gone, Sidra. If it survived the crash, it probably stepped outside and became a meal for one of the natives. No, she said with quiet certainty. First it carried its eggs into the safe hold. Maybe it was following the same mind call we followed. Maybe the call draws anything above a certain level of intelligence to it. Perhaps that's how it screens out the rest of the jungle life. It was meant as a record for another intelligent species to find. Whatever was in this ship must have found it. The safe hold probably looked like a good place to leave the eggs. You're assuming that the ship and whatever was inside was alien to Stanza 9. I know it was, Sidra said stubbornly. There's something wrong about it, I keep telling you. It will take a full-scale scientific investigation to find out the truth. Perhaps another intelligent species developed on this planet. No, he waved the quartz flash around inside the ship. You can't be sure of that, Sidra. Severance, please come away from there. After what I saw of those eggs, we've got to assume that the ship is dangerous. Maybe it's protected the way the eggs were. Just a minute. I want to get a closer look at this stuff. Doesn't look like this metal has had the corrosion damage most metal gets on Renaissance. He whistled soundlessly between his teeth, his eyes gleaming with barely suppressed excitement. We've got to be able to find this ship again. Severance punched a code into the directional indicator. Between this thing and the safe hold, I'm going to make enough credit to launch Severance Pay, Limited in a big way. Is that all you can think about? Selling this information? You've got a one-track mind, Teague Severance. This is the find of the century, ultimately maybe far more significant than the safe hold. And all you can talk about is how much you'll get when you sell the location. Yeah, well, a man has to keep his eye on the main chance. He edged closer, shining the flash around the edge of the jagged metal. Suddenly they heard a sharp hiss, and something with a long tail and 4 short legs leapt from the darkness. Severance ducked, and the disturbed inhabitant of the ship disappeared into the trees. What was that? Sidra took a deep breath, a roacher. They like caves. That one must have thought he'd found a really nifty home when he came across this thing. He wrinkled his nose as he leaned forward again. What a stench. The roacher's been living here a while. Sidra stepped closer, caught a whiff of the rancid odor, and nearly choked. Are you going inside that ship? I just want to take a quick look around. I don't think that's a good idea, Severance. I'll be just a minute. He stepped over the jagged edge. Stay here in the opening where I can keep an eye on you. Reluctantly she moved closer, aware of a deep curiosity that was at war with her instinct to put as much distance as possible between herself and the ship. The ramifications of the discovery were endless. She could certainly understand Severance's fascination with it. But Sidra didn't like the feel of the whole thing any more than she had liked the feel she'd gotten from the eggs. The quartz flash moved around inside the ship, falling on banks of alien machinery that stood silent and blank. There was a lounge that might have been a seat or a bed for a body the size of a man, but it was shaped oddly. Sidra had a passing mental image of one of the blue monsters, grown to the size of a man, lying on that lounge, and she shuddered. The creatures from the eggs were bad enough when they were hatchlings. She didn't want to imagine what the adult version looked like. Look at this, Sidra. Severance shone the light along the surface of a long, sealed case. It was made of the same black metal as the hull of the ship, but the top was fashioned of a clear material, perhaps a hard plastic. There were scratch marks on the clear portion, as if something hungry had tried to get inside. Whatever it was had not succeeded in prying open the case. What do you think it is? Sidra asked. Some kind of storage facility, probably. I can't see what's inside. The cover looks clear, but it's not when I shine the light down through it. Too much dirt and grit caked on it. Maybe I can get it open. Don't, Severance. It looks too much like a coffin. Let's leave it for an exploration company that's got equipment and time. We don't have either right now. He paused as if a part of him realized the truth of what she was saying, but Sidra saw his eyes drift back to the long case. She realized that getting him out of the ship wasn't going to be easy. She remembered all too clearly how stubbornly he had insisted on fetching the egg from the safe hold. Sidra decided to try a drastic approach to breaking the spell the ship seemed to have on him. I'll just be another minute or so, Sidra. He ran his hand along the line on the metal case where the clear section joined the black portion. Fine. She swung around determinedly. I'm leaving. Sidra. Don't be a fool. You can't leave without me. Want to bet? She was sure of herself, absolutely convinced that she had to get him out of the ship. The same sense of wrongness was permeating her senses as she had experienced when she had kicked the blue reptilian carcass out of dye-protected circle. Damn it, Sidra, come back here. That's a direct order. No. You'll have to come with me if you don't want me to leave alone. She paused, about to shoulder her way through a wall of vines, and glanced back. Severance, I mean this. I'm leaving and I. Severance. His name was a scream on her lips as she looked back and saw him silhouetted in the doorway. Behind him a deathly black light flashed inside the ship. But light couldn't be black, Sidra thought in horror. For a timeless instant everything seemed frozen. Energy crackled from the depths of the round ship, flickering around Severance's body as he stood poised with the pulsar in his hand. For a few seconds he stood staring out at her, his face a mask of agony, and then he collapsed backward, out of sight. The black glare flashed again and then died out. Sidra caught her breath in fear and raced forward, slamming to a halt at the opening in the ship. Severance, where are you? She could see nothing. The quartz flash no longer shone in the darkness. He was dead, Sidra thought in a flash of hysteria. No, it wasn't possible. She refused to believe it. Frantically she started to scramble over the torn hull. She had one leg swung over the edge when she heard the heavy scrape of claws on metal. Sidra froze. She knew with sure instinct that the long coffin-like case had opened. The shock of that knowledge was enough to make her feel dizzy. Clutching at every ounce of willpower she possessed, she started to edge back out of the ship. Slowly, her eyes never leaving the jagged opening, she backed away from the horror that lurked within. But her body seemed to be moving in slow motion. It was like a dream in which she was trapped, knowing that she should flee but finding herself unable to make her body respond. The blue, leathery body appeared in the opening of the ship. Sidra was mesmerized by the shock of its size. As tall as a man but far heavier. Standing erect, its pale, iridescent blue belly looked obscenely shiny. The head was massive, built to hold the teeth of a predator. Red eyes gleamed with the flat, lethal, unemotional expression of a true reptile. The little appendages she had seen on the hatchling were indeed sickeningly hand-like. One of them held Severance's pulsar. The jungle was safer than what waited in the alien ship. Sidra whirled to run. Racer. Stunned to hear Severance's voice, Sidra glanced over her shoulder. There was no sign of him. The alien lifted one massive clawed foot over the edge of the jagged metal. It was coming after her. Frantically Sidra tried to peer around it. Severance, where are you? Damn you to hell, Racer. You're dead. This time you'll stay dead. The blue reptile raised the pulsar it was holding, aiming it at Sidra. The voice was coming from the mouth of the alien. Disoriented, Sidra reached out to grab a tree limb to steady herself. The creature moved closer. Severance, if you have any control over that thing, make it stop. Don't let it come any closer. Stop talking with Sidra's voice, damn you. Where is she? What have you done with her? You're already dead meat, Racer. Tell me what you've done with her, or I'll make it slow this time. No. With a staggering sense of disorientation, Sidra began to realize what must be happening. Severance, listen to me. Can you hear me? Sidra, where are you? The 6-foot reptile swung its scaled neck, searching the vegetation. The pulsar didn't wave. Severance, is that you holding the pulsar? She was trembling with the force of will it took to stay where she was, instead of fleeing into the jungle. Of course it's me. Where are you? The huge mouth moved as if having trouble shaping the words, but the voice was definitely Severance's. Come out, Sidra. It's all right. I'm standing right in front of you. Severance, it's another illusion trap. I must look like Racer to you, and you look like a monster to me. Please put down the pulsar. She took another step backward and found herself with her back to a thick tree. An illusion? It can't be. It's too damn real. But he was staring at her, the hideously unemotional gaze full of a deep, savage hunger. In spite of her analysis of the situation, Sidra was terrified. Even if she was right and the creature facing her was Severance, she might not be able to convince him of who she was before he pulled the trigger of the pulsar. It's me, Severance. Please believe me. It's only another illusion. Saints know we've seen enough of them lately. The creature took another ponderous step closer. An illusion? Prove it. Take my hand, Sidra. One of the clawed palms was extended toward her. The pulsar was still aimed at her breast. Don't touch me. She was certain that what she was seeing was only a bad dream, but her instinct for self-preservation was stronger than her logic. She pressed herself tightly against me. Tree. The creature that claimed to be Severance took another step forward, holding out the hand-like appendage that wasn't gripping the pulsar. Sidra, if it's really you, prove it. Take my hand. Don't look at me like that. Stay away from me until I figure out what's going on. We've got to break the illusion. I'll know it's you if I touch you. Nothing on this planet could feel quite like you feel. Please stay away from me. She was trapped against the tree, and the creature took another pace closer. The eyes raked her. If she was wrong, she was already dead. The reptile halted. The hand holding the pulsar came up with a swift, one-sure movement, aiming at her head. Sidra closed her eyes. There was no time to run. It would be better to go like this than to have her head snapped off between those fierce jaws. Severance, she whispered. The creature triggered the pulsar. Sidra waited for the withering shock, wondering what it would feel like, hoping it would be quick. There was a sharp movement in the tree beside her. She opened her eyes to see a mouthful of fangs fall past her head and land at her feet. The fangs were connected to a sinuous, mud-colored body. She stared at it in dazed astonishment. Whatever it was dead. Hesitantly, she raised her eyes. The blue reptile still held the pulsar, but it was no longer aimed at her. Come away from the tree, Sidra. You never know what's hiding behind trees around here. Once more a blue, hand-like appendage was held out to her. Slowly Sidra moved away from the tree, her eyes never leaving the awful mouth that spoke with Severance's voice. Are you sure it's you, Severance? From the way you look at me, I admit that I've got my doubts. But I know Racer is dead. He has to be dead. A little trust is all we've got to work with, so we'll take it from here. He continued to hold out the appendage. He was right. A little trust and some common sense was all they had to work with at the moment. Uneasily Sidra touched the leathered palm. The unhuman fingers closed around hers. She closed her eyes, waiting for disaster. Then, slowly, the universe seemed to right itself. The hand holding hers felt warm and familiar. She relaxed slightly. You're right, Severance said, sounding wearily relieved. Whatever it is, it's just an illusion. Yes, she agreed shakily. But it's so real. I'm afraid to open my eyes. Try it. As long as you're holding my hand, you can keep telling yourself who I am. Believe me, you don't look like Racer any longer. Slowly she risked a glance through slitted lashes. When she saw Severance's familiar face watching her with narrow-eyed concern, she breathed a sigh of relief. "You're back to normal," she told him. "Says who?" But he grinned briefly. "What happened to you in there?" "I saw a strange flash behind you, and you fell backward. When I got close to see what had happened, you came toward me looking very blue and very hungry." "I don't know. I felt a sort of shock that knocked me down. I lost the quartz flash. When I got up again, you were screaming, but you looked like Cord Racer. I feel all right. Do I still look okay to you?" She nodded, afraid to let go of his hand for fear that he would turn back into a monster. "I've about had it with things messing around with my head. I thought you were the one who was so convinced that Mind Link was the ultimate form of orgasm." She was outraged. "I never said any such thing. I beg your pardon. My misunderstanding. Harmonic Mind Link is a beautiful, creative, sensitive experience. It is not an orgasm, and it is not made up of horrible illusions." "How do you know?" "You've never experienced it, remember? One doesn't have to have experienced something to have an understanding of it. I keep forgetting about your educational accomplishments." Severance headed back to the gaping hole in the ship. "Yell if I start turning into a blue monster again. I'm going to start yelling right now." "Severance, I think we ought to get out of here." "I agree. I just want to see if I can find the quartz flash first, though." He used the flame for illumination as he leaned back inside the ship and scanned the interior. "There it is. We'll need it tonight. Stay here while I get it. The last time you went inside, you came out wearing an ugly blue suit. I'm not sure I could stand it a second time around." He was already inside, scooping up the flash. He flicked it on one last time. "Look, Sidra. If I hold the light just right, I think I can see into that case." He used his fist to scrub off some of the dirt. "Sweet Harmony, I think it's a skeleton." Leaning through the opening of the ship, Sidra caught a glimpse of a huge skeleton mouth through the murky case cover. She shuddered. "Look at those teeth." Severance grinned briefly. "Definitely a carnivore." Sidra glanced at his own rather feral smile. "His teeth remind me of yours." "Damn it, Severance, if you don't come out of there, so help me, I'll—" A flash of black light at the end of the case interrupted her words. Once more energy sizzled, although it seemed weaker this time. The light. "Severance, that's what happened before." Severance felt the same tingling shock he had experienced earlier. Energy clawed him, not as strong this time, but enough to force him to his knees. With both hands he gripped the pulsar and aimed for the source of the eerie light. He squeezed off one shot and then another before a small explosion rocked the shattered ship. He heard Sidra call his name, and then everything went still. Slowly he got back to his feet, watching as the light flickered and died at the end of the long case. "Sidra? I'm all right, Severance. So are you. What happened?" He examined the charred metal fixture that had produced the crackling energy and the light. "Whatever it is, it's useless now. Tough to keep machinery working on Renaissance." Chapter 17. The hike through the jungle to the river's edge was without further incident. Sidra was exceedingly grateful. When the campsite came into view, looking very much as it had when they left, she smiled with relief and headed for the tent. "I can't wait to change these clothes. This habit wolves have of wearing one set of clothes all day long is bad enough, but to be stuck in the same set for 3 days is very annoying." She plucked at the fastening of the oversized shirt as she walked through the silent deflector screens. "Wait a minute, Sidra. Let me make sure nothing has decided to take up residence in the tent. The deflectors have been off for at least a full day." Severance caught her arm. She stopped short. "Yes, of course. Details. Paying attention to details is supposed to be one way of staying alive on this planet." He stepped around her and cautiously opened the tent, pulsar in hand. "If you ask me, sheer luck has a fair amount to do with staying alive around here." Satisfied with the tent search, Severance turned to give Sidra a laconic glance. I didn't know you believed in luck. I've learned a lot lately. She sauntered past him as he waved her into the tent. What I'd really like is another bath. I don't know how you survived without your usual 2 hours a day in a lav. A clean body aids in the development of a harmoniously tuned mind, she quoted from inside the tent, one of your Clinian laws? A minor but important one. She stuck her head outside the tent and smiled winningly. Feel like fetching some water for me? His mouth kicked up at the corner as he took in the blatantly coaxing expression. You're not the only one who could use a bath. I smell like the inside of that egg-laying spaceship. I'll rig up something. You always managed to rig up something. She ducked back inside the tent. There were more important things to worry about first, however. Severance stepped into the skimmer and critically scanned the instruments and the innards of the powerhouse. There was still sufficient power to recharge the deflectors. He snapped the power pack out of the pulsar, replaced it, and then got the deflectors operating at full strength. When he was satisfied with the security of the campsite, he put in the call to port try again. The comm set worked after a bit of relatively minor tinkering. Where in a renegade's hell have you been, Severance? I've had XLX reps yelling at me for 2 days. Seems they're expecting some sensors. Where's Overcash? The security official sounded short-tempered and inclined to be abusive. Overcash became a meal. So did Racer. Racer? He was on a run upriver to the Masterson field camp. How did you connect with him? It's a long story. I'm requesting a skimmer and pilot to pick us up. Who's us? Oh, you've still got the little harmonic with you? If Overcash and Racer wound up feeding the local wildlife, how did she make it? She's tougher than she looks. How about the skimmer? Give me your coordinates. I'll get someone out to you as soon as possible. Can you make it through another night? Yeah, the deflectors are working, and we've got a pulsar. I'll have a skimmer out to you by midday tomorrow. Thanks, Severance said, and waited for the inevitable final question. Nothing came for free on Renaissance. Or anywhere else in the Stanza 9 system for that matter. Who's picking up the tab for the rescue run? XLX? No. Charge it to my account, Severance said. There was a short wait while his account was pulled up from the computer. Good enough, the security officer said. Your credit is still first class. Looks like you always pay your bills. Always, Severance murmured, and switched off the comm set. He sat for a moment in the gently rocking skimmer and idly watched a pair of Draken eyes that were watching him. Nothing came for free. There was a price on everything. How much of a price had he forced Sidra to pay in order to survive? He'd had no right to subject her to the events of the past few days. He should have taken better care of her. His job was to protect her. Instead, she had taken care of him. He remembered the comfort she had given him when he had been swimming in and out of his fever. In addition to the hazy nightmares, he saw fleeting images of her gentle touch, the cooling baths, and the soft warmth of her lap as she cradled his head. She had come aboard Severance Pay as a delicate, cultivated creature accustomed to the finest manners and the most elevated of lifestyles. This morning he had awakened to find a young huntress rising from the edge of a stream to bring in the day's meat. Because of him she had been forced to become a carnivore. That seemed unpleasantly symbolic to Severance. She had learned other things from him too. He'd had no right to teach her about passion. But even as he berated himself, Severance knew deep in his gut that, given the chance, he would have repeated the lesson. The woman pulled too strongly at his senses and his mind. The 2 weeks on board Severance Pay alone with her had been sweet hell at times. He had known then that if she stayed with him on the run to QED, she would end up in his bunk. As long as he was anywhere near her, he would have no peace unless he knew he could possess her. He could not allow her a choice. She affected him too fiercely, made him ache with need, filled him with the desire to put a claim on her. At the same time he was aware of a violent desire to protect her. The possessiveness and the protectiveness went hand in hand, seeming natural and inevitable until the twin goals foundered on the ultimate dilemma. How could he protect her from himself? Everything he did for her and to her took Sidra farther and farther from the one thing she wanted most in life. Because of him, her goal of becoming a true harmonic was more distant than it had ever been. He had forced the wolf in her to the surface after she had spent years struggling to suppress that part of her nature. As he watched, the Draken eyes disappeared under the water. Severance continued staring unseeingly at the point where the creature had vanished. It seemed to him that Sidra had given him more than he'd had any right to take. She had welcomed him in her arms, drawn him into her with an honest, sweet passion that had taken away his breath. She had given him an intense loyalty, the kind he had learned not to expect from anyone since Jude had been killed. Severance could not imagine any female of his acquaintance who would have thrown herself into a river full of Drakens rather than have allowed herself to be carried off and used against him. But Sidra offered more than loyalty and passion. She radiated a sense of rightness, a quiet certainty that he didn't fully understand. Severance? Where's the water? He shook off the bittersweet mood and got to his feet. She was standing on the bank, gazing curiously into the shattered wall of the skimmer's cabin. He grinned. I'll have something ready in a few minutes. He opened the skimmer's cargo hold. As she had said, he was good at rigging things. Fixing a bathing apparatus for a fastidious lady from Clementia shouldn't be an impossible assignment. In reality, the job wasn't difficult, given the contents of the skimmer's cargo hold. He was cutting a length of plastic tubing when he noticed the carton of sensors. The bright red COD seal was still in place. Mail still waiting to be delivered. He looked at it for a long moment and then went back to work on the bathing arrangements. When he was finished, he handed the bucket full of water and the plastic tubing to Sidra. Try this. When you're done, I'll use it. She eyed him critically. Do you have any depilatory cream left in your travel pack? Don't worry, Sidra. You'll look just as cute with hairy legs. My legs are fine, she informed him. The cream I use lasts for a month. It's your beard that needs work. Severance touched the side of his face, felt the stubble, and grimaced. Oh. For some reason he was oddly embarrassed. The knowledge annoyed him, and he frowned. There'll be a skimmer out from Try Again at about midday tomorrow. She nodded, seemingly content as she examined the bucket and hose she was holding. What about your XLX delivery? Funny you should mention it. I was just thinking about that myself. As late as it is, I'll be lucky to collect for it. She looked up, alarmed. If XLX doesn't pay for it, don't give it to them. It's better for Severance pay, Limited's reputation if I deliver late rather than not at all. Besides, I'm getting tired of people trying to steal those reading sensors. Let XLX worry about them. Severance, she said sternly, you are not going to simply hand them over without getting paid for them. Not after all we've been through to protect them. His gaze narrowed in faint amusement. You're beginning to sound like a real member of a mail ship crew. Her chin lifted proudly. I am a real member of the crew. I don't know why you insist on forgetting that fact when it suits you. You certainly had no trouble remembering it the night you came into the Bloodsucker and announced that we were leaving on this little joy run up the river. She was right. I should have left you behind after all. Nonsense. Racer would have gotten hold of me one way or another and used me as a hostage or something. He was a very determined man, wasn't he? Yes, Severance said, thinking about it. He was. As long as you were alive, you were a constant reminder to him. He couldn't forget his actions that day in the Sink Swamp, and he never knew when you might tell someone else about them. On top of that, he was the one who got your brother killed. He must have known that if you ever figured it, but you wouldn't rest until you'd settled the score. It must have eaten at him for ages before he finally decided to take care of the problem permanently. You're a very perceptive woman at times, Sidra Rainforest. She smiled. I've been trained to be perceptive. Now turn around, Severance. I want to take my bath. He hesitated, wanting to ask her how she really felt deep inside about the fact that he had killed a man. Then, deciding it might be better not to know the answer, he turned his back and went to work foraging in the skimmer's cargo hold for other useful items. I've been thinking about that skeleton back in the alien ship, Sidra said later as she finished eating her vegetables. She had been tremendously relieved to find a presspock that contained something besides meat. She didn't think she would ever grow to actually enjoy the taste of meat. Severance had no such qualms, naturally. He was into his second full presspock meal. Wolfing it down, as it were, don't think about it. It'll give you nightmares, he advised. I wonder if that creature was the pilot of the ship, she persisted, ignoring his advice. That sphere didn't look big enough to house two monsters that size. Whatever it was must have been traveling alone. Except for the eggs. Severance paused, chewing thoughtfully. Yes, the eggs. That's going to give several biologists a lot to think about. I wonder if the ship was a small colony vessel. Maybe we humans aren't the only ones who have started settling other worlds. Sidra had a sudden thought. What if that ship was just one of many, Severance? If there were others, we have to assume that they didn't fare much better than that one did. No one has recorded a sighting of anything like that blue monster. At least, I'm not aware of any such sightings. It's a big planet. True. But an aggressive, intelligent species would have probably made its presence known by now. We've been here for several decades. They did appear aggressive, all right. Sidra shuddered. Didn't do them much good though. They didn't survive.